The electric vehicle race wasn't supposed to get more crowded, at least. That's what many people believed. For years, the headlines belonged to the same names. Tesla pushed software and innovation. BYD shocked the industry with aggressive pricing and battery technology. Toyota relied on decades of trust and reliability. Every new discussion about the future of transportation seemed to revolve around one of these giants. Then something unexpected happened. A company that wasn't leading the EV conversation suddenly introduced a vehicle that forced people to pay attention. Not because it was the fastest, not because it had the longest range, and not because it promised some revolutionary technology nobody had ever seen before. The reason was much simpler: its price. When reports began circulating that Hyundai's new electric SUV could start at around $21,000 in some markets, people immediately started asking a different question. What exactly is Hyundai planning? Because if there's one thing slowing down electric vehicle adoption around the world, it's not awareness. Most people already know EVs exist. They know they can save money on fuel. They know governments are encouraging the transition. The real problem is affordability. Millions of drivers like the idea of owning an electric vehicle. They just don't like the price tag attached to one. And that's where this story begins. Not with a battery, not with a charging station, but with a decision. A decision Hyundai made years before this electric SUV ever appeared. You see, when automakers launch new electric vehicles, they often create entirely new names, new designs, and new identities. The goal is to signal that the future has arrived. Hyundai chose a different path. Instead of betting on an unfamiliar product, the company attached its EV ambitions to one of its most successful SUVs, a vehicle that millions of people already knew, a vehicle that had spent years building trust with families, commuters, and everyday drivers. The Shrita at first glance. This might not seem important, but this decision changed everything. Because when consumers hear about a completely new electric vehicle, they usually ask whether they can trust it. When they hear about an electric version of a vehicle they've already seen on the road for years, the conversation becomes very different. Now they're asking whether it's finally time to switch. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because convincing someone to buy an EV isn't really about technology anymore. It's about removing fear. Fear of charging, fear of reliability, fear of spending thousands of dollars on something unfamiliar. Hyundai understood that. And that's why the company wasn't just launching another electric vehicle. It was trying to make EV ownership feel normal. But there was one problem. Trust can get people interested. Trust cannot keep them interested. The moment potential buyers started paying attention, they immediately focused on three questions. How far can it go? How long does charging take? And is the lower price hiding a compromise somewhere? Those questions would become much more important once people looked beneath the surface. Because this wasn't simply a gasoline SUV with a battery stuffed inside. And that's where the story starts to get interesting. Most people imagine building an electric vehicle is straightforward. Remove the engine, install a battery, add an electric motor. Done. The reality is far more complicated. When Hyundai developed the electric version, engineers had to rethink how the entire vehicle worked. The battery wasn't just another component. It became the foundation of the vehicle itself. Its position affected balance. Its temperature affected performance. Its health affected range. And its safety affected everything. That meant Hyundai needed systems, constantly monitoring what most drivers would never see. Software tracking battery cells, cooling systems, managing heat, protection mechanisms designed to respond before problems could grow. For buyers, these details might sound technical, but they influence something much more important: confidence. Because no matter how attractive an EV looks on paper, people won't buy it if they don't trust what happens after years of ownership. And this only matters once you see what happened next. As interest in affordable EVs continued growing, the entire industry found itself facing a difficult reality. Building an electric vehicle is one challenge. Building one that people can actually live with every day is another. This is where range enters the conversation. And range has become one of the most misunderstood topics in the EV world. Manufacturers publish impressive numbers. Drivers imagine perfect conditions. Reality usually sits somewhere in between. City driving often helps electric vehicles perform better than expected. Highway driving can produce very different results. Weather changes things, driving habits change things. Even traffic can change things. Suddenly, the question isn't how far a vehicle can travel in a laboratory test. The question becomes whether it can handle real life. Daily commutes, school runs, weekend trips, unexpected detours, the kinds of journeys people never think about until they're worried about battery percentage. Fortunately for Hyundai, there was another factor working in its favor: operating costs. For many households, the numbers can be difficult to ignore. Electricity often costs significantly less than gasoline. The more frequently someone drives, the more noticeable those savings become. And for the first time, some buyers started wondering whether staying with gasoline actually made less financial sense. But while consumers were calculating costs, Hyundai was preparing for a much bigger battle, because affordable pricing alone doesn't win market share. Not when your competitors include some of the most influential companies in the automotive industry. BYD had batteries, Tesla had software. Toyota had trust built over generations. Each company owned a strength that customers immediately recognized. Hyundai didn't dominate any single category, at least not in the same way. Instead, Hyundai pursued a riskier strategy: balance. Rather than trying to become the best at one thing, the company aimed to become good at everything that mattered: good technology, good practicality, good service, support, good pricing, good ownership experience. The approach sounded sensible, but it raised a dangerous question. Can balance beat specialization? Can a company win by offering fewer extremes and more consistency? The answer wasn't obvious, because history tends to reward category leaders, not category balancers. Yet Hyundai possessed an advantage that many people overlooked. And it wasn't inside the vehicle, it was behind it. While consumers compared screens, batteries, and charging speeds, Hyundai had spent years building something much less exciting: factories, supply chains, production networks, service, infrastructure, the kind of systems nobody talks about until they stop working. Modern electric vehicles depend on thousands of components arriving at the right place at the right time. A single disruption can slow production. A shortage can delay deliveries. A supply issue can increase costs. Hyundai understood this long before many consumers ever considered buying an EV. That's why the company expanded manufacturing capabilities across multiple regions, invested in localization strategies, and worked to reduce dependence on individual suppliers. None of this generates viral headlines, but it determines whether a company can scale. And scale may become the most important advantage in the entire EV race, because eventually, success isn't measured by how many vehicles a company can design. It's measured by how many it can deliver. Which brings us back to the question that started this story. Is this electric SUV a game changer? The honest answer is that nobody knows yet. Not because the vehicle lacks potential, but because its significance may have nothing to do with the vehicle itself. The most important part of this story might be what happens after it. If affordable electric SUVs become common, the market changes. If ordinary families begin switching in large numbers, the industry changes. If consumers stop viewing EVs as premium products and start viewing them as normal transportation, everything changes. And maybe that's the real reason this vehicle matters. Not because it's trying to beat Tesla, not because it's trying to defeat BYD, and not because it's trying to replace Toyota, but because it represents something much larger. A future where electric vehicles are no longer products for early adopters. They're products for everyone. The question is whether we're witnessing the beginning of that future right now, or whether the real turning point is still waiting somewhere ahead. For decades, buying a vehicle followed a familiar pattern. People compared horsepower, fuel economy, maintenance costs, maybe a few comfort features. Then they made a decision. Electric vehicles changed that equation. Suddenly, buyers had to think about charging networks, battery health, software updates, energy consumption, and technologies that didn't even exist in traditional cars. For many consumers, that complexity became a barrier. Not because EVs were difficult to understand, but because they introduced uncertainty. And uncertainty is something most buyers avoid when making one of the biggest purchases in their lives. This is exactly where Hyundai believes the opportunity exists, because while competitors continue fighting for technological leadership, a large group of customers remain stuck on the sidelines. They aren't looking for the fastest acceleration. They aren't obsessed with autonomous driving features. They don't spend hours comparing battery chemistry. They simply want transportation that works every day without surprises, without complications, without requiring them to completely change how they live.